Welcome. Is the rent still too damn high? Yes, for millions and rising. This year, newcomers to Brooklyn will spend nearly 60% of their income on rent, according to the real estate blog Street Easy. Half of that, 30% of income only, is considered affordable. For Manhattan and the Bronx, the percent of income spent on rent on average is about 50%. Queens, 40%. Staten Island, at a more affordable 30%. All this is figured on median income for each borough. Street Easy has built a colorful interactive map where we can search by neighborhood and find some relative bargains. Go to streeteasy.com. But of course, sky-high rents are not unique to New York City. In a moment, we will hear how one Londoner is venting the public frustration there. Also on today's program, diversity. Increasingly, trainings around identity and race include the concept of white as a race and white privilege as an issue. Then in our public intellectual segment, we'll hear about CUNY's experiment nurturing community college students like they were Ivy Leaguers. It drops the dropout rate dramatically. And towards the end of the hour, caste in India. Not the system of social strata, but New York's manhole covers that are cast in India. It's hot, dangerous work, especially barefoot, as we'll see. But first, London, where on average the cost of housing already takes 60% of people's incomes, according to the BBC. Some of Londoners' private complaints are now in public view on electronic billboards with messages like this one. Ring a bell, New Yorkers? The signs are part of a campaign called London is Changing. Via Skype, the project's creator, Rebecca Ross, joins us. She is a designer and scholar at Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design in London and a native New Yorker. Welcome. Hello from New York. Thank you for doing this.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
We'll show some of the other billboards in a minute, but what's the idea?
Well, I wanted to explore having a public conversation about an important issue facing the city by putting the voices of people who aren't necessarily always part of the conversation about policy and planning onto the street at a large scale. And so I set up a website targeted at people who have recently or who are planning a move into, around, or away from London. And I asked sort of a simple series of questions, including where participants were moving from, where they're moving to, why they're moving, and how they feel about it. And we had about 3,600 replies over the period that the billboards were up, and edited those down to about 175 different messages, which got displayed. Really what we wanted to do was not tell people what to think, but give people the opportunity to say something about their experiences in a really public-facing way.
Well, let's take a look at some more of the billboards. We'll put another one up here. And this one, I'm not sure if you can see it where you are. This is the one that reads, "That's where I wanted them to grow up, in a city which was alive and challenging and busy." What does that speak to specifically?
Well, I think that a number of the responses to the project were people really valuing the cultural opportunities of London and the diversity of London. And in some cases, those were people moving to London, and in some cases, those were people moving away from London. And so it's quite interesting. So some of the people who were disappointed to be moving away were kind of worried about not having as much access to those kinds of opportunities for themselves or for their family. For their families, and then some people are really excited to be newly engaging with those opportunities. Some of the other ones I had, London has everything I could want. It's expensive, but it's worth it.
Right, and we're going to put up some of the other ones. Yeah. So let's see. Let's go through these as we show them, and we can put the next one up right now. And this one says, "If I was 10 years older, I would have had a head start on the property ladder and would probably have managed to stay here." Before we talk about the content of that, while this slide is up, what are we looking at? It looks like in the last two slides now, we've seen the back of London bus design,
Sure.
huh?
Yeah, that's the new Route Master. I think that's the I can't tell what bus route that is, but yeah, that's the brand new Route Master, which was one of Boris Johnson's flagship projects.
Aha. Is it a double-decker bus? Regular
Yeah,
city bus?
all of London buses, most London bus routes are now double-decker buses again, and that's the kind of brand new double-decker bus design.
And since Boris Johnson, the current mayor, has rolled back the congestion pricing a little bit, maybe we see that too in that slide. That was pretty crowded road.
Actually, this slide, this is well into the congestion zone, and I think even while, no matter what happens with the congestion pricing, this is pretty typical of a London street in terms of traffic.
Nice shots, by the way. Who gave us these pictures?
Actually, the person who took all the pictures is Duarte de Grassa, who's a former student of mine at Central St. Martin's, and he also helped me with the website on this project. So, he's been great.
So the age-based lament on that billboard, if I was 10 years older, I could have afforded to live here. Is that true for a lot of people?
I think so. I think there's really a kind of consciousness about there being this sort of wall that you're on one side of or the other, because prices have increased so rapidly. And also sort of the kind of the legalities of rent control have changed in the past few years. And so there is a generation that maybe either has a secure tenancy or was able to buy property when it was more kind of affordable relative to salaries. And I think the younger generation just doesn't, a lot of the younger generation feels like unless you have sort of wealth, that it's very difficult to actually own property. And I think owning property is a kind of, it maybe, I don't know, I hesitate to compare London and New York because I lived in both cities at different times in my life.
Oh,
but
please do.
I think that owning property is kind of the rental market in London is a little more tenuous. It's by the week often rather than by the month. And it's furnished rather than unfurnished. And I think that people don't feel as much like the place is their home until they own it. Whereas I think maybe in New York, renters are much more comfortable thinking about a place as home, not to mention the sort of financial security aspect of owning a property as opposed to renting when your rent could be changed really rapidly or you could lose your tenancy.
So let's look at another billboard that you put up that somebody wrote in the phrase to you and then you made the billboard out of it that people will see around London. And this one is kind of different from the others. It says, I was sad to move, but there are more opportunities in London. In other words, I was sad to come to London, but there are more opportunities in London than at home. And that's a different kind of lament, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting because it says below that billboard was contributed by a designer who recently relocated from Ireland to Haringey. Haringey is one of the London boroughs in the north. And that's an interesting one because actually, as much as the majority of the billboard responses that I got are from middle-class people who are feeling priced out, London's population is increasing right now, not decreasing. And there are a lot of people moving here because there are career opportunities and jobs available here that might not be available from the cities, their cities of origin. Yeah. And so it's a little bit of a kind of, I think those people are less represented in this project because the project relied a lot on networks, local networks. And I think the people who are maybe moving on are more networked into the city than new arrivers. But
so for all that we think about people who want to be in a city like New York or a city like London because it's exciting, because it's interesting, because there are great people here, et cetera, there are people like this who are kind of forced into this unaffordable lifestyle by the realities of where opportunity is.
Yeah, and people sharing rooms, many people sharing rooms, sharing homes, and they're here to work, and it's a big deal to be able to work, and I think those are some of the sort of subtleties and nuance that I was glad that came out through the contributions.
Here's one more. And for people seeing it on their screen, if you can't read it, I just hope that we will look back at this as a moment of insanity from which we were rescued. This is my SOS. Wow, how sad.
It's interesting that because a few people who I know quite well complained to me that they didn't get to, they said, they went to the website, and on the website it says, I recently moved, or I'm planning a move. And then they complained to me that they didn't get to contribute because they're not recently moving. They didn't recently move, and they're not planning a move. And I think that the fact that all of the voices in this project are coming from kind of people who are really caught up in this dynamic is really important. And this billboard is a kind of, I think this billboard is a sort of, it's a summary of the kind of, it refers back to the medium in a way that I thought was interesting, and it sort of underlines the rationale for the project in many ways.
So we've got about a minute left. This is up in various locations in the city, so a lot of different people are running into them. They're electronic billboards. I'll make that clear to our viewers. So they change. You'll see a different message at a different time on the same one. What's the public reaction been like? And has this been a big thing in the City of London? Well,
it's been quite extensive. I've never really had this much attention before in anything that I've done. Some of the public reactions in the billboards themselves, people saying things like, one of the billboards is, London's not the only paradise of opportunity on this earth, and all sorts of things about kind of basically the billboards are in dialogue with each other. So the public reaction is part of becomes incorporated into the dialogue. But I think people are really people are really interested in the project. And I've heard from a lot of people thanking me for doing the project. And the kind of media here has picked it up, and it's circulated quite a bit. And I think some people kind of object to some of the particular comments, but they also can object through the billboards themselves. So that's kind of interesting.
Yes. So making them think and react, and then you publish some of their reactions. Thank you so much. This is so interesting. I'm going to be very curious now to see if something derivative of your work springs up here in New York. Thank you.
That would be very interesting. Thank you very much, Brian.
Diversity. It's not just about minorities anymore. Increasingly, talks and trainings around identity and race include the concept of white as a race and white privilege as an issue. This is now becoming central to discussions of race in America, and not just in progressive circles and on college campuses. The white privilege conversation has reached even New York City's upscale prep schools. What exactly is being taught and why? Joining us, Derrick Gay, an educational consultant who leads diversity seminars. And to put all this in historical context, New School Professor of History, Natalia Mehlman Petrzela. She is author of Classroom Wars, Language, Sex, and the Making of Modern Political Culture. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Derrick, tell us what you're doing.
What I'm doing. So I'm an educational consultant, and I'm currently working with schools on issues of cultural competency, diversity, and inclusion.
So give me an example of where you start. Let's say you go into a mostly white high school, and you want to give these kids, maybe for the first time in their lives, the opportunity, and maybe opportunity is the wrong word, and maybe the very scary prospect of talking about themselves as white people. Where do you start?
So I start with this whole notion that we all have various forms of identity. So one of the exercises that I've designed focuses on thinking about who you are. So I share with the group some data that I've collected over the past 10 years of the same question I've asked independent school students and faculty and staff. When you look at the mirror, who do you see, and what are some of the categories that sort of constitute who you are? Certainly race, gender, class, sexual orientation, age, educational background, political affiliations, and the like. Because I think for a number of years, as I mentioned in my TED Talk, that this whole diversity framework has very much been an identity. And the identity has served as a proxy for historically marginalized groups, and in the framework of race, it's been about black people, Latino people, and Asian people. So often, particularly in a predominantly white institution, I realize that white students, either A or faculty, have not thought of themselves as a racialized being, and come to diversity very much with the mindset that they're here to learn about the other. Mm-hmm. So first is to disabuse them of that notion, to sort of make an even playing field that we all have identity, and we all have claim and benefit to this conversation.
And since you're the historian in the room, this did not happen very much before?
No, and so if you think about the kind of first half of the 20th century, really the kind of governing paradigm around issues of diversity was assimilation. And so that's like that old melting pot idea, right? That there's this kind of dominant white Anglo culture which outsiders are slowly melded into, and that's how you rise in society. Then after the civil rights movements of the 1960s, things start to look quite different. And I mean, the negative way that's often characterized is the rise of identity politics. But essentially, if you take away that negative valence, this idea that identity was all of a sudden privileged in many different ways. Both people claiming, be it black power, brown power, their identity as women, kind of historically marginalized groups started claiming their identities. Now, the educational outgrowth of that were a lot of the programs, first on college campuses that we're aware of, Black studies, women's studies, Chicano studies, and those have trickled down.
Everything but white and
exactly,
male.
Exactly, because very much the idea was, well, people who have gender are women, right? People who have race are black, brown, outsiders, right? So it took a long time for kind of whiteness to be interrogated as a social construct, not until really the 1980s or 90s, and that's on college campuses.
And now it's moving even to high school.
Absolutely.
And interrogated is an interesting word because, Derrick, if most people come out of identity studies, that is to say, if black people, brown people, yellow, red people, whatever you want to call them, come out of identity studies, and women with feeling better about themselves than they did before, are whites supposed to come out of this feeling worse about themselves than they did before?
And this, as you can imagine, is often the pushback we hear. And we're speaking earlier about this whole notion of, in the United States, often we equate sort of white power or discussions around whiteness with white supremacy, right? Because whiteness has been normalized, and as we know, whiteness was in fact sort of conflated with citizenship for a number of years. So this whole notion that white people can come together to explore the ways in which their identity has some type of social impact or informs the way they view the world is a novelty, first and foremost, but also there's a stigma involved. So often people will say, we have affinity groups around race for people of color. What if we were to have an affinity group for white people as well? And the answer is, well, we do have affinity groups for white people, and some of the benefits and outcomes are the same.
And so privilege then has to come into it. And how do you deal with privilege?
And so privilege I would define as, and first I would distinguish between privilege and privileged, right? Because I think that the word privileged often characterizes, or there are these images of sort of a white, upper-class Christian male who's put into this category, and therefore he can't be part of this conversation, right? He's the problem. I often in my workshops talk about this notion of privilege as being unearned advantage, and we all have different forms of privilege. So again, not to dilute the power of white privilege, but also to not have a paradigm where if you are of color, you're necessarily oppressed and you have no agency, and if you're white, you're coming from this conversation only with privilege, and those are your positions, right. And there's no room for.
But as a matter of history and sort of on average, it's certainly going to be that, one has come from a more privileged starting point than the other, and that's a fundamental or the fundamental thing to acknowledge, right, and to come to grips with.
Acknowledge, and then what do you do with that privilege? Does it paralyze you to the point where there are feelings of guilt and embarrassment or lack, or do I acknowledge this privilege, right, which is very difficult, especially in the American paradigm of meritocracy, that I have what I have only because of the work that I've done. What do I do with this privilege? And I argue that with that privilege, white privilege, male privilege, Christian privilege, other types of privileges, that we should use our voice and agency to foster this equitable society that we all dream about.
With more experience with this on college campuses,
yeah.
How has this played out when privilege gets inserted? Does it work? There's a term that I think you were telling my producer where, I think it's a common term. People, if a white person says something, somebody might say to them, check your privilege.
Yeah, so check your privilege is a phrase that comes up a lot on many different college campuses, and the idea behind it is that when you make a comment, you should kind of check the different forms of privilege which inform that comment, which is not a bad thing at all. And that I think in my particular campus at my institution, I think we've really done a lot of very good work on this front. My students are incredibly sensitive to these issues and all identify themselves in a sort of intersecting range of different categories and tend to be sensitive. The one kind of negative outcome that I've seen of this, and that I work very hard as an educator to kind of mitigate, is that some students who do consider themselves privileged in the most traditional forms, economically, racially, can sometimes feel silenced by this. Like that, oh, well, if I come from a place of privilege, I have nothing to add to this conversation. And I've sometimes
I'm just going to get
slammed for it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I have seen that happen. And what I try really hard to do, and you see that, by the way, all over social media. I mean, these are like some of the central conversations within like Twitter feminism, et cetera, of the way that this goes on. With the privilege of being in a classroom and having that group of people who have to look at each other in the face every day, you know, when they come to class, I try and make it more of a community of inquiry.
So make this really concrete. What's an example of even a conversation that has taken place in one of your classes?
Okay, so let me think right now. So one time, one student who was a young woman who came from a very wealthy part of Beverly Hills, and we were talking about bilingual education and the struggles of Chicanos in that area. And she says, well, I'm from LA, and she actually had gone to public school for part of her life, and she started talking about her experience. A person who identified as Latino said, like, what do you really know, rich white girl? Literally said that out loud in class. And she was like, you know, kind of like the wind was knocked out of her sails, which I absolutely could imagine. It made sense. So that, to me, I've got to step in and make that a kind of teachable moment. Okay, why did that make you so angry that she says that? Why do you think he said that? And so we turned it into this conversation where they both kind of acknowledge the real anger that comes from someone being marginalized in a history of marginalization and having some rich white girl tell you something, but also the unfairness of lashing out at this particular person in this particular context.
And how about a high school example? Can you give us one?
A high school example around, well, often students will say in focus groups that, you know, when we have the diversity talk or diversity lecture or what have you, if they feel that they come from a place of privilege, that they're afraid to engage because they're afraid of perhaps the reaction of not using the right word. Right, they don't want to offend, and this is with faculty members as well, which I really appreciate that you facilitate that conversation, which speaks to the importance of faculty development as well, which isn't necessarily part of education formation as a teacher to talk about these issues. Yes. But it's easier to disengage than to engage in these conversations. So you have the big elephant in the room of race. You have people who don't necessarily see themselves as racialized beings, as individuals. They're reading Twitter feeds, they're learning about Ferguson and Eric Gardner and the like, but they don't have the vocabulary and they're afraid of how it might be perceived.
And is it even getting harder these days? Because I think with fourth wave feminism and other identity things that are going on campus and maybe in the high schools, people now are talking about microaggressions, which is a new term. So you could say this thing that's such a small amount off from what's politically correct, and you're guilty of a microaggression. So is it getting easier or harder to have these conversations?
It can. If you're kind of cynical about this, it's harder to navigate some of this terrain because one can be scared of misstepping. I mean, you know, right now we're in a big conversation at our institution about the use of pronouns, right, and the gender pronouns. And who even questioned gender pronouns 10 years ago on kind of mainstream college campuses? And so there's this sense of, is there anything I can count on as fixed anymore? And that can be a little bit frustrating and hard to navigate. However, I try and look at it in this long historical sense and think for a long time people were frustrated like, oh, now women are in the classroom, I have to navigate that. There was a lot of conversation about that. We're going to have girls in the classroom, they'll be so distracting, we're going to have to worry what we say. This is the price of really working towards a diverse society.
Last thought real quick, same question.
Microaggressions. Microaggressions I view as being an outgrowth of sort of the ways in which racism has morphed. So it's no longer often, particularly in independent schools, and we've been desensitized to, you'll rarely hear someone say, I don't like you because you're a racial epithet.
Right.
But we will see the subtle comments, the assumptions and the like, manifests in the form of microaggression. So the education around microaggressions is providing people with the tools, first, to mitigate these actions or thoughts, what have you, before they happen, but also to have some tools to navigate what happens.
To have conversations.
That's right.
Well, a little piece of the difficult conversation
Yes.
about race and gender and identity that we need to have in this country. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Time for Public Intellectual, where we look at new research with the power to change minds and public policy. For most community college students, staying in school and graduating is an ongoing battle to overcome the academic hurdles as well as personal and financial challenges. The numbers reflect the struggle. According to the National Student Clearinghouse, 60% of community college students are still working on their degrees 6 years in. And the longer it takes, the less likely they will graduate at all. The solution, however, just might be right under our noses here at the City University of New York. For the past 7 years, CUNY has been working to help students meet and overcome those pressures through something called ASAP, short for Accelerated Study in Associate Programs. It nurtures students in many ways. MDRC, the nonprofit social policy think tank, has been studying CUNY's program. Senior Associate Michael Weiss is here to report on the results. We are also pleased to have CUNY's Dean for Student Success Initiatives, Donna Linderman. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
As a matter of research, what did you set out to study and how?
So MDRC conducted an evaluation to try to find out the effectiveness of CUNY's ASAP program compared to CUNY's regular college program courses and services. And we found the program to be extremely effective. In our evaluation, around 40% of the students that were part of this program, they earned a degree within 3 years. And this compares to a control group where only 22% of students earned a degree in that time period. The difference, around 18 percentage points, is what we estimate to be the benefit or value added of this program.
So talk about this program and what's in it that's different than for other students.
So ASAP is a structured full-time degree pathway that provides comprehensive resources and supports so that students can enter into an associate degree program, remain full-time, and graduate within 3 years. We provide a robust package of financial resources to remove that barrier to full-time study.
So financial resources, that's money.
Right, so tuition waivers if students have a gap need between tuition and fees, textbook assistance, monthly unlimited Metro cards, and importantly, coupled with that are very comprehensive support services, specifically structured and high-touch advisement.
Give me an example of the support services that go beyond money.
So every student that's in ASAP is assigned to a specific advisor who works with them from the minute they walk in the door until the day they graduate. So it's a one point of contact adult who helps them not just with their academics, but also their personal growth needs, the transition to college, navigating a college campus, struggles academically. They make sure they go to tutoring if they need it. They make sure they're taking the right classes, and to accelerate momentum, taking winter and summer classes. And very importantly, if they have developmental need, taking those classes immediately and continuously.
It sounds like one of those upper-class prep schools we were talking about in the last segment.
In many ways, it really is a small liberal arts focused and supportive experience in the nation's largest urban institution. So we try to really make the students feel connected to one another and to the staff.
And what student population specifically, demographically, did you wind up studying in order to measure the success of ASAP?
So to be part of the evaluation that we conducted, students had to be low income, usually receiving a Pell Grant or 200% of federal poverty level. They had to have 1 or 2 remedial needs or developmental education needs, which most community college students enter actually having. They had to be New York City residents, and they had to be willing to participate if they were in the program group full time. This is slightly different than the full population that CUNY serves with part of this program. They normally actually also serve students that are college ready, meaning that they pass placement tests when they enter school. For the actual study, the students, 3/4 of them were minorities. 30% of them or so were first in family college goers. 30% of them, I guess, reported that they were, I'm trying to remember now what the stats are. That's a good
Well, that's all
sample.
right. That's a good sampling right there.
Yeah.
These are students who would traditionally, for all the reasons that you mentioned, or many of them, be considered at risk of dropping out, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And if you look at national statistics or statistics at CUNY, most students actually are at risk of dropping out, as you noted in the beginning.
At the community college level.
At the community college level, yeah. And within CUNY, the 3-year graduation rate is something like 20%. So there is no one group, I think, that really, you're feeling like there's a guarantee that they're going to graduate. I think because these students had developmental needs, they're probably considered particularly at risk and being low income as well.
So is the bottom line really here money in the sense of, class size matters? If you can give more individual attention to each student with the kinds of counseling and things you were talking about, as well as the financial side, then you have this small sort of student to staff ratio and financial help, but it's expensive to treat these students as if they were in a small school and give them all this time. So is it about having enough dollars per student to treat them all like they're really special?
I think that's a piece of it. I think it's not just a question of the resources, it's how you use them. So the program is very purposeful in its design in terms of how we conduct advisement, in terms of how we structure the experience for students, really paying attention and staying on top of them. So the money, in the absence of that type of very tight structure, we're very data-driven in the program. We're constantly looking at our own data. So in addition to the study we participated in, we do very robust internal evaluation of how the program is doing. And we're constantly looking at, well, how are we doing with retention? How's the enrollment looking for students with developmental need? What's the take-up rate or the usage of tutoring? So it is very important to think about the implementation in conjunction with the additional resources. That's very critical to the programs.
So this study happens to come at a time when President Obama is trying to change the national conversation about community college and make it something that is free, if necessary, for every student in America. So every American, if they want to, when they finish high school, can at least get a community college education to be prepared for the contemporary economy. Is there a message from this for President Obama if he were to choose to look?
So one thing that was very pleasing is that if you go to the White House webpage, you'll actually see that they mentioned in at least the initial plans for this proposal that to be part of the tuition-free college, you'd actually have to meet certain requirements, and one of the requirements was to be implementing evidence-based programs, and they even specifically mentioned ASAP. So it's great to hear that they're considering the importance not just of what these dollars might do in terms of getting more students to enroll in college, but the importance of then thinking how are you going to get them to complete, and it's important that I think people look at programs like ASAP that are really making a difference to make it so that it's not just about getting people that, into the door, but also out the end.
And so how about for other community colleges around the country? Is this a model program? Is this something that, after doing this, it is an independent study, right? I mean, I should say we're talking about CUNY here on CUNY TV, which is obviously funded by CUNY. Is your study independent?
Yeah, so MDRC is an independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan social policy research firm. We did not develop the program. We did not design it. We just served the role in this case of being an independent evaluator. With respect to, is this a model for other college campuses? Well, we're excited that in our study there were 3 CUNY colleges that are part of this larger system that participated and saw these rather large effects. And we're hopeful that other colleges around the country might be willing to try that out. Currently, MDRC and CUNY are actually working to get together at 3 Ohio community colleges who are trying to replicate the program. And as part of it, there will also be an evaluation to see, can they actually implement this? It's a pretty complicated program to implement, to get all these parts integrated together. So can they actually implement the program? And then if they are able to implement it, what kind of effects do they see in a new context with a new type of student? So there's a lot of factors that make it, potentially difficult, and including having to change some of the program components. Like, for example, Donna mentioned the monthly Metro cards. Well, Ohio, that's kind of not really a good incentive.
Right.
But so
Let's give them each a car.
Actually close. So I think there we're going to try out using gas cards. Or food, because there, most people are commuter students. So use that as an incentive. And part of what I think the program does pretty impressively is they link some of those program services to some of those financial supports. So students are supposed to attend advising 2 times a month, and they're monitoring that. And receipt of these monthly Metro cards are dependent on that. And the same thing will be true in Ohio, where they're trying to really link and integrate some of the program components.
Interesting. Am I right that there are some majors that you cannot do within the ASAP program?
Yes, so we do support most majors. The majors that we don't currently support are nursing and allied health. And the reason for that is because these are majors where there are prerequisites to enter the major. So you can't just say, I'm a nursing major. You have to pass certain classes with certain grades in order to get into nursing or rad tech, certain allied health programs. Additionally, there's a clinical component. So to ensure, we can't guarantee that students will A, get into the major, and B, be able to finish the clinical component within 3 years. So we've traditionally stayed away from those majors. But other than that, we're open to most majors and can support most students regardless of what their interest is.
So last thing, if this is so good now that you want to see it expanded on a huge basis, how expandable is it to the rest of, you know, CUNY, the CUNY community college system, and how much money would that cost? Tell Governor Cuomo.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure Donna can talk more about recent funding that has been provided by the City of New York to help fund the expansion of the program within CUNY. But it is a big challenge. We estimated in this study that the net cost was around $4,700 per student. I'm sure Donna will tell you that in 2015 they plan to try to reduce costs to $3,900 per year per student if you're in the program. But that's a lot of money, and it's unclear whether or not people are willing to commit that. Because of the large increase in graduation rates, we actually found that if you look at the cost per graduate in people who participate in ASAP compared to the regular students, the control group in our study, that actually is lower just because there's so many more graduates. So I think it should hopefully spark a big debate about if you can see these results replicated in a place like Ohio and maybe other places throughout the country, maybe we should consider investing a lot more.
Or throughout the state, maybe before going to Ohio, should be going to Adirondack Community College upstate and, others around New York State and get all the state legislators on board to say, oh, this works, so let's fund this thing.
I like the idea.
Just a thought.
So the mayor of the city of New York is a huge fan and supporter. So Mayor de Blasio has invested an additional $35 million. So ASAP will expand from a current enrollment of 4,300 students, just under 4,300 at 7 colleges, to 13,000 at 9 colleges by 2017. So the city's making a major investment in ASAP. It's part of the mayor's agenda to address inequality in the city. We're very excited and honored to be part of that. I would love for the state to also to be interested. The state has invested in ASAP and does contribute to the program. So we're also very honored that they've been supportive as well.
Last minute, how do you do cost-benefit analysis? You've done it and come out with some, right?
So actually, MDRC did not do it, but separately, Hank Levin from Teachers College at Columbia University, he did a cost-benefit analysis, and it involves a lot of complicated projecting of, what, given these increases in graduation rates, what will that result in the future in terms of potential earnings increases and decreases in healthcare costs and criminal justice costs and things like this. And he found the program to be very cost beneficial in those senses, whether it be from the perspective of the student or from the perspective of the state or things like this. So,
well, if we're not going back to a 20th century manufacturing economy, and I think we're not, this is a really important thing in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In the mad rush of New York City's foot traffic, it's easy to miss 3 words in large print right at our feet. They are clues to untold stories. Many of the manhole covers or sewer caps dotting the city's streets bear the words, "Made in India." One curious anthropology student spent a year in West Bengal documenting the sheer human power spent making these iron discs that can weigh up to 300 pounds. First part of the trailer for Cast in India, then we'll meet the filmmaker.
তুমি কত দূরে আমার এই মনের কথা যায় ভেসে দূরে
Scenes from Caste in India. The 20-minute-long film was a short documentary finalist for the 2015 Social Impact Media Awards. Here with us, the filmmaker, Natalia Mehlman. She is a doctoral student in sociocultural anthropology at NYU. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So you spent about a month over there and a year making the film?
Right.
What gave you the idea to look into the manufacture of manhole covers?
I don't know if you've noticed, Brian, as you've been walking on the streets, but one day when I was walking in New York City, my glance just fell to the ground, and I found it very curious to see the Made in India stamp emblazoned on these 100 to 200 pound manhole covers. And I wondered, what is it about the making of these manhole covers that they are being produced in India and shipped so many thousand miles away?
And so you went to see where they're made. Are they mostly made in one part of India for all of New York City?
The majority of New York City manhole covers that are made in India are made in West Bengal, but New York City manhole covers are also made in China, made in Romania, and made in the USA, among other countries.
Were you surprised at what you found?
Well, I had done a lot of preliminary research, and to prepare for the film, I had practiced shooting at foundries in New York also, primarily artist and sculpture foundries, bronze foundries. There was one in Brooklyn that I shot at. So I was familiar with the kind of technical process, and I had seen some photographs. So I kind of had an idea of what to anticipate.
And is your reaction that this is abusive work? Is this like, oh my God, I found the sweatshops where the manhole covers are made, I found the slave labor, like we hear about our clothes, you know, or our Apple computer products, and people go, oh my God, I had no idea. Something like that, or no?
Well, my objective wasn't so much to do shock value, but really kind of try and get people to think and reflect more on the people and the workers and the kind of labor that they do behind everyday city objects. And oftentimes now in our kind of global economic system, these kinds of social relations are obscured from our purview. And as viewers will see in the film, the treatment that I do of my subjects that I was very committed to is, and what comes through is that these workers live with dignity. They certainly can be compensated more, and the profit margins don't need to be as high, but they live with dignity. And
how demanding is the work?
It's very demanding, and it's very difficult work. It's the molten iron that they carry. You don't see the scene in the trailer, but in the film you can see scenes of them carrying hundreds of pounds of molten iron on their shoulders, and it's, you know, you have to be very adept and nimble. There's also the inhalation of a lot of pollutants that come from the burning of this iron. And
right, if you're working in an industrial environment like that in the United States, it would be fairly well regulated by OSHA and other health standards. Is it there?
There are regulations, and because this is a New York City product, New York City municipalities also, I was told, regulate these industries. It's unclear to me exactly what that process looks like, but there is an infrastructure in place for inspection from the United States.
And I'm told they're unionized workers. Is that true?
They are unionized workers. In West Bengal, there's a high density of unions, but overall in India, approximately 90% of the working population is not unionized. But these workers are unionized, and in the film, you actually see them in the middle of a negotiation for a contract.
How were you greeted when you were there? Suddenly, here's this woman from America with a camera shooting these guys at work, or how did that go?
Well, I think, you know, they were intrigued by me. People always take interest, I think, when you take interest in them. And they were very welcoming and friendly. The workers were certainly more open and embracing of my presence than perhaps other work managers in the foundry. But
and management didn't try to keep you out?
No, I mean, I very much approached this project, as people will see in the film, with a kind of sensitivity. I don't have a kind of investigative expose or journalistic angle. So my anthropological training has really informed that and worked.
Because you are a sociocultural anthropologist.
Yes, I'm a sociocultural anthropology PhD candidate at NYU, and I'm also in the Culture and Media program where we're trained in visual anthropology, and that's why I'm I've also made this documentary.
Visual anthropology. So
Right.
that's mostly film and photography?
Right, yes. We're trained in film as an additional method to communicate our scholarship.
But with a scholarship as opposed to showbiz or even journalistic kind of frame.
Right. So my film, as viewers will see, is an ethnographic film. And that means that it really takes interest and it kind of embodies a kind of patience that allows scenes in front of the viewer to unfold.
Fascinating. Did the workers consider themselves as doing something dangerous, or do they just see it as normal?
For them, you know, they're very, this work for them is very routinized. So every day, I think there's a acute awareness every day of the possible dangers that they may encounter. And sometimes things do go awry. And so I sensed that. And when the molten turns on, which is at a particular molten iron turns on, the furnace turns on, for that process, then there is a kind of shift, I noticed, amongst the workers in the kind of seriousness in which
Yes.
their bodies compose themselves. But it's not a kind of obsession with the danger.
Yes. Are there a lot of injuries and even deaths? And why are they barefoot in some of these cases?
Well, in fact, the being barefoot enables them to be more agile. That's what some of the workers in the film told me. So I think that's their motivation.
Don't drop any molten iron on your foot.
Yes, it's also incredibly hot, you know, and you have to make quick moves. And the boots that you're required to wear are very cumbersome.
Why don't we make New York's manhole covers in New York?
Well, the reason, one, that Made in India is actually emblazoned on the manhole covers in New York City, and some of them, the public ones. So private manhole covers don't have that same requirement to list where they're from, but that's a requirement of American foundry workers, so that people in the United States know that these manhole covers are outsourced. And the reason that they're outsourced is because, as you know, we know that we had a industry here for foundry work, but the labor in India is much cheaper. And because of that, businesses here have an incentive to outsource and have the products made in India. And even though they're being shipped thousands of miles away, the different cost of labor is so high.
So how, I mean, the labor, the wages must be tiny. I mean, we're talking about really heavy things, so they must be expensive to ship. So can you put the wages in American terms?
I can. It's hard to do that because, you know, it's a different system and purchasing power is very different. So it's not an equal comparison. But one is that shipping costs are actually very, very cheap. They're not because you can ship in such bulk. So that's not a huge cost for people that order, for businesses that order from the United States. But the wages, so to put things in perspective, one manhole cover costs around $100, up to $150. And each manhole cover, you have to buy a cover and a frame. And the frame is underneath the cover in the ground. And the workers make, these are the workers featured in the film are the molders, and they're the highest level of laborers at the foundry, and they make approximately $200 to $300 a month.
$200 to $300 a month, which in India is considered?
Again, these workers live with dignity, but I think that they could be compensated more.
Yeah. So what's the reaction been like to the film? You won at least one festival award, and I gather you've been showing it around. What's the first thing people usually say to you after they've seen the full film?
Well, a lot of people will say, wow, I know in New York audiences, you know, often either people have noticed it or they haven't. So I think I get two kinds of reactions often. One is that I've noticed this and I think it's so curious and I've always wanted to know more and it's so great that you made a film about it. And the other kind of reaction I get is, oh my gosh, I've never ever seen this before. And so I've been really trying to show it to New York audiences. I had my world premiere of the film at the American Museum of Natural History in October and at the Margaret Mead Film Festival. And I'm currently in talks with the NYC DOE, the Department of Education, to see if I can try and incorporate the film into the global history curriculum for New York City high school students.
That's great. And as a 20-minute film, it would fit within an academic period.
Right, absolutely.
That's great. And any movie theaters? I guess it's a little too long to be a short, and it's too short to be a feature film.
I don't know if I'll have any kind of theatrical release, but one could always be hopeful, you know.
Yeah. So where could our viewers see it if they want to watch the whole film?
I would encourage viewers to follow the film on Facebook. It's a Facebook/CastInIndia, facebook.com/CastInIndia, and on the website, castinIndia.com, I list upcoming screenings. And I recently had a really great screening in New York, Alligators in the Sewer Day. And
Alligators in the Sewer Day?
yeah, Alligators in the Sewer Day. The Manhattan Borough historian has an event where he recounts urban legends in New York. And one of the urban legends is that there's alligators in the sewer.
10 seconds. What's your next film?
My next film is, I hope, about circuses, traveling circuses in India, but
Ooh.
we don't know.
Thank you very much for sharing this film with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brian.
And that's our program for today. We're here every week at this hour. Next time, the human cost of electronic workplace monitoring, its time motion efficiency on steroids. And do tune into my radio program at 10 a.m. weekdays on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, Obamacare on trial at the Supreme Court. How did it go? I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.
One of the things I